Before we start daily routine, the topic and subject matter for late debate has been chosen and submitted, and I will now read, therefore be it resolved that the expected sale of the Bowater Mercy timberlands provide the single greatest opportunity for Nova Scotians to gain greater control of a majority renewable resource, and the province should ensure that those lands become an asset of maximum value for the people of Nova Scotia. Submitted by the Honourable Member for Queens. Daily routine, presenting and reading petitions. Presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. Statements by ministers. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am pleased to stand before you and the other members of the Legislature today to share our plan to consult with Nova Scotians on the future of affordable housing in the province. Having an affordable home is fundamental to the health and well-being of families. In past, previous governments have been often focused on the wrong kind of housing to meet the needs of people with disabilities, seniors, and families with low incomes. Worse, Mr. Speaker, they didn't really have a plan for Nova Scotia families who were struggling to make ends meet. Mr. Speaker, this government has a plan, and we're taking action. For the first time, Nova Scotia will create a strategy to address the housing needs of Nova Scotia families. For the first time, Nova Scotians will have a plan to make housing more affordable and to improve the health and diversity of our communities. Starting today, Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians from across the province will be able to help shape what affordable housing will look like for families for generations to come. Over the next few weeks, public meetings will be held in 7 communities across the province. Key meetings will also take place with our housing partners. Nova Scotians will also be able to learn more about this public engagement process and submit their feedback online by visiting our website at housing.novascotia.com. Mr. Speaker, this public consultation will seek feedback on innovative, practical housing solutions. This includes building diverse, mixed communities, act as a catalyst for partnership and change, make owning your home more affordable, and make housing the first step in greater independence. Mr. Speaker, the rest of this public consultation will be a housing plan that offers people better housing options and community supports. When people can choose the housing that's right for them, our communities are healthier, more vibrant, and offer more opportunities. Mr. Speaker, developing a new affordable housing strategy comes at a very important time. As our economy is growing and we're creating more jobs, we are seeing the price of real estate go up in some areas. That is putting home ownership out of reach for many of those with modest income. Between our growing economy, changes in our population, and the withdrawal of federal support, Nova Scotians face a choice. We can go back to the failed policies of the past, which has left many families without an affordable place to call home. Mr. Speaker, or we can move forward together and create a new and innovative approach that works for families and helps make home ownership a real option to more Nova Scotians. I would like to encourage all Nova Scotians to get involved because this is a very important public consultation process. The time has come to build a new foundation for housing in Nova Scotia. And it's an exciting time, Mr. Speaker. Together, Let's create a blueprint that will shape our future and last for generations. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to table our discussion paper on housing strategy for Nova Scotia, and members will also receive a copy.
I'd like to remind the honourable member that when you have information to be sent out in the House, it's information to be passed out is not to be tabled to members of the Assembly, except for when you're doing reports and committees or other papers. Thank you. The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank the Minister's office for sending this statement in advance. We would all agree, I think, that more has to be done to create affordable housing in this province. The Minister for Community Services announced last fall that there would be a housing strategy. I have to say, where is this strategy? It's 3.5 years into a 4-year mandate, and we don't have the strategy yet. It would seem that the minister has been dragging her feet on this. Why was this consultation not done before? How much consultation needs to be done in order for this minister to act? The 1,800 families who are waiting to get into public housing do not need more consultation. They need action from this government. Families are being forced from their homes because they can't make ends meet. Rents are increasing, power rates continue to climb, and food bank usage is on the rise. Affordable housing isn't about just building new stock, although we certainly need it across this province. I implore this government to be creative and consider how we can better deliver supportive housing options, but you haven't done it yet, and how we can ensure that people can stay in their homes and get the emergency repairs they need without being cut from programs because their child tax benefit takes their income a few dollars over the income cutoff. For a family living in poverty, having a roof over their head can mean all the difference in the world. Just yesterday at Community Services Committee, government members heard that this NDP government is not doing enough to address poverty in this province. We haven't heard anything about this government's commitment to the poverty reduction strategy that had all-party support in 2009. Does this government support it or not? It was recently reported that 1 in 13 seniors in HRM is living in poverty. Seniors are having greater difficulty being able to stay in their homes and making sure they are properly maintained, let alone being able to secure affordable, accessible housing. Many families living in poverty are not considering whether or not they are able to buy a home. They are simply trying to keep the home they have, if they have one. Nova Scotians need more than a consultation from this government. The Liberal caucus has raised this question many times. How is it that this government has over $500 million to spend on corporations, but not that kind of money to help our most vulnerable? It is the job of the government to support society's most vulnerable. Nova Scotians who are living in poverty and who are trying to keep a roof over their heads are wondering, when will the NDP do the job they were elected to do and help them? So, to the homeless person tonight who cannot find a warm, safe place to sleep, to the single mom who can't pay for rent because her power bills are too high, and for the senior couple in rural Nova Scotia who cannot get repairs done to their house, here's your consultation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I too would like to thank the Minister for providing us with a copy of her statement in advance. Having access to affordable housing is important for families. But, Mr. Speaker, here are some startling statistics that I will table at the end of my response. First, from 2009 to 2012, the cost of shelter in Nova Scotia has increased 8.6%. And I will table that. In the past 3 years, Nova Scotia has lost 7,400 full-time jobs. I'll table that as well. And included in what I have tabled, Mr. Speaker, it also says that the full-time workforce shrank by 2%, and that Nova Scotia's performance on full-time jobs was the second worst in the country. Mr. Speaker, in order for families to even think about being housing secure, they need to have jobs. That's the first step, something this government has apparently forgotten about. Water, fuel, and electricity costs also come into play when families are looking at housing. From 2009 to 2012, the cost of those utilities rose an astounding 19.8%. Because of bad policies coming from that government, like their bite-the-bullet electricity plan, not only are Nova Scotians struggling to provide shelter for their families, they're struggling to afford to stay warm in the cold winter months, Mr. Speaker. As mentioned before, in 2009, a poverty reduction strategy was introduced, and we've seen little or no progress on that. Also, Mr. Speaker, the recently released hunger count that I will table clearly illustrates the toll this government's high-tax, high-energy policies have on the hard-working people in our province. Can you imagine, Mr. Speaker, almost 3,000 hard-working Nova Scotians with jobs couldn't make ends meet and used a food bank in the last year. It's shameful, Mr. Speaker, that government is making life harder for Nova Scotians who are playing by the rules and doing all the right things. What I see, Mr. Speaker, is a government grasping at straws as the reality of the past 3 years of poor decisions and bad management is finally catching up with them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I make an introduction before I begin my statement?
Certainly.
Mr. Speaker, with us in the gallery today are Proceedings Technologies, represented by Barry Brad, the CEO, Robert Zunti, who is the Executive Vice President, and Scott Richards, who is the President of the Atlantic Region. All three of these gentlemen were with me earlier today for the announcement that Proceedings is expanding its workforce here in Nova Scotia, and I would ask the members of the legislature to welcome our guests. Pleased to rise today to talk about yet another great opportunity for Nova Scotia that this government has helped bring home. Like the shipbuilding contracts, this is an opportunity that creates good jobs for the people of the province and allows Nova Scotians working out west to return home and to live and work. And of course, I'm talking about Proceedings Technologies of Alberta. This is an engineering consulting firm that passed over the options to set up in Calgary and India and to expand its workforce right here in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, this company is already recruiting Nova Scotians out west, and it will hire and retain more engineering graduates to work in the up to 440 new jobs over the next 5 years, supporting Western energy projects from Halifax. This is great news for Nova Scotia, although, Mr. Speaker, based on the Liberals' reputation as job killers, I'm sure that they will find a way to disagree with it. Mr. Speaker, you don't have to take... Did you just listen to what your members were saying? Yeah. Mr. Speaker, you don't have to take my word that having Proceedings set up shop here is a great opportunity for Nova Scotia. You just have to ask Veronica Nixie, a fourth-year engineering student from Dalhousie University who just completed her co-op term with Proceedings' pilot office in Halifax. Veronica said, I quote, the province is doing the right thing by helping bring in innovative companies like Projects, giving her and her classmates the opportunity to work in their field without having to make the difficult choice to leave home. Or how about Paula Gallagher, Chair of the Halifax Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors, who called today's announcement an excellent testament of the competitiveness of Halifax and its unique sustainable competitive advantage in engineering. Mr. Speaker, the 440 people working at Projects will earn almost $140 million with benefits over the first 5 years. This is money that they will be able to spend in their communities and to make life better for families. The job creation over the first 5 years of that period will generate an estimated $18.2 million in direct tax revenue for the province. Mr. Speaker, overall, the net tax for the province is $7 million through this agreement. This is money that will go into schools, into health care, into roads in this province, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia is a great place to invest and do business. Just look at Jazz Air or Baskin & Robbins, two successful companies that made the choice to shut down in Ontario and to bring their business to Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, they're good jobs that will keep Nova Scotia working. Mr. Speaker, this government is committed to keeping young people here at home and providing more opportunities for those who moved away to come back. Our Jobs Here plan is focused on learning, innovation, and competitiveness. The project's expansion here is an example of all three. And the bottom line, Mr. Speaker, is it's good jobs in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, our government will continue to work with companies like Projects to create the high-paying jobs of the future. So young people, our Nova Scotians, can build a life here, help Nova Scotia turn the corner toward economic growth and prosperity. Mr. Speaker, because of these kinds of jobs, the future starts here.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the Premier for sending a notice of a copy of his remarks to our office earlier on. And Mr. Speaker, if the Projects deal ends up creating the promised 440 jobs for Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, it will be good news. I say if because this government has made big promises and failed to live up to their job numbers, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Premier promised 500 jobs at DSME, Mr. Speaker, but there are less than 60 working there today. Mr. Speaker, the government said they'd be saving hundreds of jobs with their investment in Scanwood. Mr. Speaker, that company went bankrupt. These are just a few examples, Mr. Speaker. In total, this government agreed to give 6 companies $590 million and watch them lay off more than 1,300 Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, the people of this province understandably doubt the Premier's job numbers and targets. If the Projects deal ends up bringing 440 Nova Scotians home to this province, Mr. Speaker, it will be good news. And we certainly need to keep our sons and daughters in our province. Mr. Speaker, in fact, since the NDP government took office, Mr. Speaker, we've seen more than 4,000 young people leave our province, Mr. Speaker. If the promised 440 jobs actually arrive here, it will help put a small dent in the number of young Nova Scotians who've left to other provinces because this government's economic management of our province's poor labour market. Mr. Speaker, if the promised 440 jobs actually are created in Nova Scotia, that will help address our youth unemployment rate that sits at 18.3%, an unemployment rate that has increased since the NDP government has taken office. Mr. Speaker, I have mixed feelings. Mr. Speaker, I have mixed feelings about the need to use payroll rebates to attract employers here. The benefit of this tool is that companies actually have to create the jobs and to receive the benefit. But it worries me that our economy is so uncompetitive that we need to use these tools to bring employers here. It worries me that since taking office, this government has made our economy less competitive by increasing taxes, Mr. Speaker, ignoring power rates, ignoring fuel costs, and driving up the cost of doing business, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, these payroll rebates are good stopgaps, Mr. Speaker, but this government's actions are taking this stopgap and turning it into a permanent economic development tool. These payroll rebates, however, are being used to help an out-of-province company compete for or poach talent from Nova Scotia businesses. Businesses expect to have to compete with other companies for talent, Mr. Speaker, but they shouldn't have to compete with the government-subsidized companies for talent, Mr. Speaker. That's an unfair advantage, and that's the government picking winners and losers. I hope, Mr. Speaker, these 440 jobs are created in this province. And I say hope, Mr. Speaker, because this government's big deals generally don't work out. These government deals, Mr. Speaker, are usually oversold, overhyped, and underdelivered, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hope these 440 jobs are created because we need to get more than the 40,000 unemployed Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, back to work. Mr. Speaker, I am left to say I hope because we, the official opposition, know this government's track record, Mr. Speaker, and the more than 40,000 unemployed Nova Scotians are living with the example of this government's track record, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to respond to the announcement.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to start, first of all, by welcoming projects to the House of Assembly today. There are officials that are here. And also, of course, Mr. Speaker, welcoming them to Nova Scotia. It is great that they're here. That they've already accomplished something unique because I don't usually get such applause from that side of the House for something that I say. But, Mr. Speaker, I would like to...
Order. Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to welcome them here, but of course I don't have an $11,400,000 handshake for them like the Premier has here today, but still that we welcome them. And on the topic of financial handouts, Mr. Speaker, I can't help but comment on the Premier's creative accounting. He seems quite proud to point out that he believes that he's going to make a profit for the taxpayer of $7 million. But let's be clear, there is no profit in what's happening today. It is an outright expense of $11,400,000 financed by the taxpayers of Nova Scotia. The absurdity of the Premier's argument is clear if you take it to its logical conclusion. If we were to refund the taxes paid by all the companies of Nova Scotia, or refund 90% of the taxes paid by all Nova Scotia companies but allow them to keep the final 10, the Premier would claim a profit by doing that. But of course, common sense tells us that that's not the way it actually works, Mr. Speaker. Projects is obviously welcome here. They have a desire to bring Nova Scotians home from out west and recruit others. But, Mr. Speaker, that is true of all Nova Scotia companies, including the companies that exist and operate here today, some of whom have been here for many years, like Stantec, like AMC, like Whitman Ben, like Canada CNBC. Those are all companies, Mr. Speaker, currently existing, currently hiring engineers that have not asked for nor received a cent of government assistance for their efforts, but they share the same objective as all Nova Scotian companies share the same objective of recruiting people from out west. And if the government's assistance was limited to truly new jobs that were truly coming here from other parts of the country or around the world, they might have a stronger case. But, Mr. Speaker, the Premier is using the blunt instrument of tax assistance to pay for jobs, or even moving from one end of Hollis Street in Halifax down to the other end of Hollis Street in Halifax. And Mr. Speaker, that is not creating a new job in Nova Scotia. That's actually using taxpayers' money to move jobs around, and that is one of the great weaknesses in the Premier's creative accounting here today. And Mr. Speaker, to compare this transaction of paying one company to hire people, even from other Nova Scotia companies, to compare that to the shipyard contract is laughable, Mr. Speaker. The whole point of the shipyard contract is that it gives Irving 35 years of work building real ships for Canada's Navy that then allow all Nova Scotia companies without a grant from the Government of Canada to line up for that work and win that work on the basis of their quality of their service, on the basis of their pricing, and to hire Nova Scotians along the way. Even in that transaction, the Premier saw an opportunity to throw taxpayers' money at the Irving Group. But that was not the intent of the shipyard contract. It was to kickstart our local economy by lifting all boats at the same time. And that is the opposite of what the Premier is doing here with this deal, where he's picked one company to the exclusion of all others in the industry to support. It's the exact opposite of what happened with the shipyard contract. So, Mr. Speaker, we all want to build a truly great economy for Nova Scotia. Projects does. We all in this House do. But this has got to stop. The only true way to make Nova Scotia a great place to invest and create jobs is when taxpayer-financed assistance like this becomes unnecessary and we focus on the real way of building our economy from the ground up. Balance the budget once and for all. Stop the growth in debt to our kids. Lower taxes like the HST so families can get ahead. Build affordable power rates that allow businesses to grow and people to pay their bills. Get back to fair and balanced labor laws so Nova Scotia can attract companies, good companies like Projects, without having to pay them to be here. Thank you very much.
Government notices of motion. The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas November is Crohn's and Colitis Awareness Month, and whereas Canada has amongst the highest rates of Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis in the world, and Nova Scotia has the highest rate of these diseases in the country, and whereas 200,000 Canadians suffer from inflammatory bowel diseases that have no cause, no cure, and limited public understanding. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly join me in recognizing November as Crohn's and Colitis Awareness Month and commend the organizations that support the sufferers of these diseases in their efforts to raise awareness and find a cure. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And before I make this resolution, may I please make an introduction?
Most certainly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge Kelsey Hagan and Keely Wilkins, who are in the gallery today, because they are visiting the Department of Education with their fathers as part of Take Our Kids to Work Day. So Kelsey and Keely, if you wouldn't mind rising and receive the warm welcome of the House.
We welcome all our guests to the gallery and hope that they enjoy this afternoon's proceedings. I will now recognize the Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas grade 9 students across the province are participating in Take Our Kids to Work Day to see career opportunities firsthand, and whereas Kids and Learning First, our plan to help every student succeed, links learning to the workplace to help prepare Nova Scotia students for good jobs and citizenship. And whereas grade 9 students will have more opportunities to explore career options in high school through programs such as co-op, skills trades, options and opportunities, and the new personal development credit. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly recognize the importance of Take Our Kids to Work Day, and that government endeavours to provide education options and career training possibilities for students to ensure that more of our graduates are able to stay and work here in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Nova Scotians celebrated artistic excellence at the 7th Annual Creative Nova Scotia Leadership Awards held on October 26th at the Brewery Market in Halifax, and whereas filmmaker Tom Fitzgerald was the winner of the prestigious Portia White Award Prize, and visual artist Kim Morgan was awarded the Lieutenant Governor of Nova Scotia Masterworks Arts Prize, and whereas Christmas Island was awarded the Community Arts and Culture Recognition Award, Germaine Como received the Prix Grand Prix Award, and the Established Artist Recognition Award went to Amy McKay, Michael Melsky, Otis Thomas, Sarah Maloney, and Shimon Walt. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly joins me in congratulating the award winners and finalists at the 7th Annual Creative Nova Scotia Leadership Awards for their achievements and contributions to the vibrant arts and culture of this province. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Nova Scotia is known for its natural beauty and its scenic trails, and whereas hiking is a great way to promote health and physical activity, to view Nova Scotia scenery and spend time with friends and family, and whereas Nova Scotia author Michael Haynes has recently published a new edition of Hiking Trails of Mainland Nova Scotia that illustrates and promotes the great network of trails and trail systems found throughout the province. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Michael Haynes for his continuous efforts in promoting hiking, walking, and snowshoeing throughout Nova Scotia, and wish him well with the launch of his new edition, Hiking Trails of Mainland Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. Introduction of bills. The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 475 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Trade Union Act.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party begs leave to introduce a bill, an act to amend Chapter 475 of the Revised Statute 1989, the Trade Union Act.
Bill number 122, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 475 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Trade Union Act.
Order the bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 260 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Liquor Control Act, to permit the interprovincial importation of wine.
The Honourable Member for Hants West begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 260 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Liquor Control Act, to permit the interprovincial importation of wine.
Bill number 123, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 260 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Liquor Control Act, to permit the interprovincial importation of wine.
Order the bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce in the West Gallery the newly re-elected HRM councillor Tim Outfit. He's the member for District 16, Bedford-Wentworth, and his daughter Elizabeth Outfit, who with her friend Tina Weld are here as part of Take Your Child to Work Day. So I ask the members to give them the warm welcome of the House.
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism on introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the gallery opposite, I'm pleased to recognize and wish he would stand and get a warm welcome from the House, Liam Hodder. Liam is a 15-year-old student at Lockview High, and today's kind of a special day for Liam because today is also his birthday. So he's here in the House observing, and he's also joined by his mom and dad.
The Honourable Member for Kings West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to draw the attention of the House to the West Gallery, where a young man from Windermere, near Berwick, a student at Rose Devant, is here as part of Take Your Child to School Day, and he's got a really major interest in politics, so I'm sure he'll enjoy the session. And I'd like for Rice Copeland to stand and get a warm welcome from the House.
The Honourable Minister of Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have a theme going here today. With your permission, with an introduction, I'd like to, this is Take Your Child to Work Day, and I'm pleased that we have several students that have been spending some time in environment today. They are in the East Gallery and joining us today. They are Jody House, Megan Rutherham, Elisa Wilson, Madison Silver, Amy McDonald, Keyshawn Skier, Brooke Bishop, Dana LeBlanc, Virginia Olson, Tina Skier, Amy Stetton, and I invite all members to give everybody a warm welcome.
And the Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was asked not to introduce this person, but I think a parent has to embarrass their child at one time in their life. In your gallery, Mr. Speaker, is my daughter Taylor, who's a grade 9 student at Sackville Heights Junior High in the French immersion program. She spent the morning at the Organ and Tissue Bank and now is spending some time here in the legislature. So I wish everybody give her a warm welcome.
The Honourable Member for Hammonds Plains Upper Sackville.
We might as well just keep the theme, but Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. These two gentlemen aren't necessarily, they're a little bit older than grade 9 students, but I want to bring the attention of the House to your gallery, Mr. Speaker. Two gentlemen who had the purchased at a church auction to follow me around for a day. So they spent about $2 and it was good and they won. So anyways, Mr. Speaker, I'd ask them to give them warm welcome to the House. Their names are Floyd Fullerton and Tunis Foreman. So please rise.
Notices of motion. The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure, given the introductions, that this one will receive unanimous support. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I will move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas today is Take Our Kids to Work Day, and whereas grade 9 kids across the country will join their parents and guardians to experience a full day of work. And whereas the goal of this day is to help students understand the importance of staying in school and encourage them to explore career choices in a practical way, even if that means coming to the House of Assembly. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House wish all of the students experiencing a full adult workday the best of luck and encourage them to stay in school so they can be successful in whatever path they choose. And Mr. Speaker, just as a final comment. I, too, am a dad of a student in grade 9. I did invite her to come here today, but she felt that her grade 9 class was more orderly and peaceful than the House of Assembly and chose to stay there. So with that little ad lib, Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I'd like to do an introduction.
Most certainly.
In the East Gallery today is a distinguished community activist who lives in the constituency of the member for Halifax Needham, but spends all of her waking hours in my constituency and does great work there. She has chosen to continue her activism by offering to serve as a member of the school board, and last night was sworn in as the school board representative for District 4 in the Halifax Regional School Board. Cindy Littlefair, I'd like to ask her to rise and receive the warm welcome of the House.
The Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas municipal and school board elections were held in Nova Scotia on October the 20th, which resulted in the election of Cindy Littlefair as the school board representative for District 4 of the Halifax Regional School Board. And whereas Ms. Littlefair was for more than 10 years a member and chair of the St. Mary's Elementary School Advisory Council and Queen Elizabeth High School School Advisory Council, and has worked for 28 years in the film, television, and print industries, including her current position as the Human Resources Manager of the Shambhala Sun-Times. And whereas Ms. Littlefair has demonstrated a record of commitment to strengthening communities, including her effort to prevent the closure of St. Mary's Elementary School, as well as her work recently to help in organizing a memorial service for our late friend Raymond Tavel, which helped unite and heal diverse communities. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulates Cindy Littlefair on her being elected to represent the family of schools in District 4, and that we wish her a successful term on the Halifax Regional School Board. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Diane Roberts, an Antigonish Town Councillor for 5 terms, decided not to reoffer in the recent municipal election, and whereas in her 19 years on council, Ms. Roberts served often as Deputy Mayor, sat on many committees, and attended Union of Nova Scotia municipality conferences, and whereas Ms. Roberts was a fixture at community events during her tenure on Town Council, and will no doubt continue to serve the community in any way she can. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House thank Diane Roberts for her 19 years of service on Town Council and wish her all the best in the future. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on June 6, 2012, Tim Hortons held its annual Camp Day, and whereas the Chester's Tim Hortons raised over $5,800 to help send deserving kids from economically disadvantaged homes on a once-in-a-lifetime camping adventure. And whereas this year's Camp Day across Canada raised a record $11 million, which will help more than 15,000 kids. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulates and thanks all Nova Scotia's all volunteers and staff from the Chester Tim Hortons for raising money on Camp Day. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Give Kids the World is an organization which provides children with life-threatening illnesses with a family trip to their 70-acre resort in Florida. And whereas Evelyn McNamara of Lower Sackville became involved with Florida's Give Kids the World resort in support of a close friend whose son had a terminal illness. And whereas Evelyn spearheaded a fundraiser on August 11th in Lower Sackville, where more than $5,800 was raised in the Power of 10 campaign. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House commend Evelyn McNamara of Lower Sackville for her commitment to raising awareness and funds to help children with life-threatening illnesses travel to Give Kids the World Village in Florida with their families for a memorable experience, and wish her future success. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Shelburne County Advanced Care paramedic Peter Nicholson was awarded an service medal for emergency medical services by Lieutenant Governor John James Grant on September 19, 2012. And whereas Peter Nicholson began his career as a paramedic in his home community of Woods Harbor 21 years ago as a volunteer medic, returning to school at the age 50 to complete his advanced care paramedic training as much cost to his family both time-wise as well as financially. And whereas Peter Nicholson is trusted and held in high esteem by his community, he serves for the respect, dignity, and quality of care he shows all his patients. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly congratulate Peter Nicholson for receiving the Exemplary Service Medal for his 21 years of service as paramedic, and wish him all the best as he continues his career as emergency medical services. Mr. Speaker, request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Jason Sanford of Scottsburn-Pictou County was the only Nova Scotian to be a member of the 2012 Canadian Men's National Softball Team, and whereas the Canadian Men's National Softball Team won a gold medal at the Pan American Championships held in Colombia in September of this year, and whereas Jason Sanford has been playing softball for over 23 years and has now won a gold medal at the Pan American Games, his next goal being to win at the International Softball Federation Men's World Championships in New Zealand in 2013. Therefore, it be resolved that this House of Assembly congratulates Jason Sanford and the Canadian Men's National Softball Team for winning a gold medal at the Pan American Games in September 2012, and wishes them further success in New Zealand in 2013 at the International Softball Federation Men's World Championship. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Guysborough Sheet Harbour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the announcement in August 2011 that new Pagewood Idler Mill in Port Hawkesbury was met with great disappointment and put 1,400 jobs at risk. And whereas this NDP government demonstrated its commitment to Nova Scotians by standing with and negotiating on behalf of the families in the Strait area and beyond during this difficult time, despite the relative silence from the member of Richmond. And whereas an agreement was reached this fall to sell the mill, ensuring employees will be able to continue living and working in their communities. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House, in particular the member for Richmond, commend the NDP government for making strategic investment decisions that protect good jobs in rural Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? No. I hear several noes. The motion is tabled. The honourable member for Truro Bible Hill.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day, I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Will Fisher, a former student at Cobequid Educational Centre and a graduate of Humber College's jazz program, has recently released his debut CD, Portage, and whereas Will Fisher's debut album, Portage, has been nominated for a 2012 Music Nova Scotia Award as Jazz Recording of the Year, and whereas during his CD release tour, Will Fisher performed to a hometown sold-out crowd and has now returned to his former high school to work with students in the music program, therefore be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulates Will Fisher on his 2012 Music Nova Scotia Award nomination and wishes him continued success in his music career. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you across the room. Mr. Speaker, with your permission, may I do an introduction?
Most certainly.
Thank you. If I could draw the attention of the members to the East Gallery, we have a young lady by the name of Catherine Logan, who is sharing her day with me. She's a grade 9 student at Eastern Passage Education Centre and a proud young New Democrat within this last year. She is also the daughter of my constituency assistant, Margaret Keats Logan. But equally important to me anyway, she affectionately considers me or calls me her second mom, so she's here as take your children to work today, your child to work today. So if I could ask the members to share in a warm welcome for me today, for Catherine today.
We welcome all our guests to the gallery and hope that they enjoy this afternoon's proceedings. I will now recognize the honourable member for Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas taking young people to work for the day is a great way to educate today's youth about the workforce and allow them to experience new and exciting career opportunities. And whereas the success of Take Our Kids to Work Day can be attributed to teachers, parents, school boards, government, and of course the students. And whereas Catherine Logan, a grade 9 student of Eastern Passage Education Centre, has joined the members of the Legislative Assembly today to learn and witness democracy in action. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House welcome Catherine Logan to Take Our Kids to Work Day and wish her well as she continues her studies. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas music is such an integral aspect of Nova Scotia's cultural identity, and whereas the vast number of music festivals and events of all levels across Nova Scotia clearly illustrates the importance of this art in the hearts of Nova Scotians. And whereas Nova Scotia Music Week, an annual event showcasing, celebrating, and honoring our musicians and industry professionals, will be hosted in Liverpool, Queens County from November the 8th to November the 11th, 2012. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly recognizes and congratulates Liverpool, Queens County for hosting Nova Scotia Music Week, November the 8th to the 11th, and invite all Nova Scotians to Liverpool for this wonderful celebration, recognizing all who contribute to the musical legacy of our province. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. whereas the talented and dedicated people of Cape Breton have often been an incentive for businesses to expand, and whereas Stream Global Services has recently announced expansion plans which may result in up to 400 new jobs being created in Glace Bay, and whereas creating good jobs in Nova Scotia is one of the driving forces behind the NDP government's Jobs Here strategy. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House congratulate Stream Global Services on its success to date and acknowledge the important role the Jobs Here plan played in encouraging its expansion in Glace Bay. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and with your permission, I'd like to do an introduction first.
Most certainly.
Thank you. I'd like to draw the attention of the members of the House to the Speaker's Gallery, where you'll find a person who was very well known to all of us, Chris Martin. Chris is here, not necessarily in his capacity as one of the talented and dedicated people who find themselves in the House of Assembly every day, but in fact as a musician whose family, I'm proud to say, originally hails from Ketch Harbour, although they migrated to town at some point. With that, I'd like to say, Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas bluesman and composer Chris Martin and his partner Tiffany Spencer are the founders of Let's Riot Records, Canada's newest independent music label, and producers of the Rockabilly Riot series at the Seahorse Tavern, a series which has even invaded the Moncton music scene. And whereas Chris Martin and the Troubleshooters have been nominated for Music Nova Scotia's Blues Recording of the Year for a whole nother family. And whereas Chris Martin also makes a mean soup, as all members of the House should know. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House congratulate Mr. Martin when they are next in the kitchen of the House of the Assembly and wish him and his bandmates success at the Music Nova Scotia Awards in Liverpool, November the 11th. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Jerry Lawrence Provincial Park in Lewis Lake continues to serve as a popular recreational destination for Nova Scotians of all ages, whereas seniors and physically challenged Nova Scotians in particular enjoy the unique features of this park, whereas this busy park was well maintained from May through to October by staff of the Department of Natural Resources. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature thanks the Department of Natural Resources for their good work at the Jerry Lawrence Provincial Park in Lewis Lake. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Lunenburg West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Mr. Bruce Oakes has been a longtime resident of Bridgewater and is a well-known musician in the area, and whereas Mr. Oakes has spent hours of his life playing at charitable events, for old-time dances, public events, and with a number of bands, including the Bridgewater Fire Department Dixieland Band, and whereas Mr. Oakes continues to be an integral part of the volunteer community, playing a multitude of instruments and on many occasions adding a perfectly pitched baritone voice to the mix, therefore be it resolved that members of this House thank Mr. Bruce Oakes for his many years of volunteer service, using his musical talents to brighten the lives of his fellow citizens, and wish him health, happiness, and success in the future. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cumberland North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas support of community and physical activity are part of the backbone that makes up rural Nova Scotia. And whereas Roy Mattinson has organized baseball games and looked after the Pugwash Ball Field for more than 30 years, and has recently been honored by having the Pugwash Ball Field renamed after him. And whereas Alex Parker, the 19-year-old grandson of Roy Mattinson, entered the Craft Canada contest by writing an essay about his grandfather that ultimately resulted in the village of Pugwash receiving $25,000 to help pay for upgrades to the ball field, and also to have the right to have TSN Sports Centre broadcast live from Pugwash. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly join me in thanking Roy Mattinson and Alex Parker for their commitment to their community and the sport of baseball. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in July of 2012, Chorus Aviation announced expansion plans for Jazz Aviation, moving approximately 150 good jobs to Nova Scotia. And whereas not only will the move help grow the economy of Nova Scotia, it will provide good jobs for skilled Nova Scotians. And whereas this move to Nova Scotia is proof that our government is dedicated to the creation of good jobs and turning the corner from the country's worst economic growth in 20 years, therefore be it resolved that all members of the House welcome the expansion of Jazz Aviation, bringing good jobs to Nova Scotia to support Nova Scotian families. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Lunenburg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Zion Evangelical Lutheran Church in Lunenburg was founded in 1772, making it the oldest Lutheran congregation in Canada, and whereas the Zion Evangelical Lutheran Church, which has had 18 pastors over the years, is celebrating its 240th anniversary this year under the leadership of Reverend Vivian S. Roberts. And whereas the celebration took place on Sunday, November 4th, including a community potluck at the Lunenburg Community Centre, followed by a special anniversary service at the church. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly recognize the long history of Zion Evangelical Lutheran Church in the town of Lunenburg and congratulates the congregation for reaching its 240th anniversary. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to do this resolution on behalf of the honourable member from Cape Breton Nova. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Ringside World Boxing Championships held in Kansas City, Missouri is the largest amateur boxing tournament in the world. Whereas Taylor Ross, the pride of Whitney Pier, recently was the first female boxer from Cape Breton to compete at this prestigious event. And whereas Taylor Ross captured the title in the female intermediate division for 13 and 14-year-olds, therefore be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulates Taylor Ross, a resident of Whitney Pier, the home of the Speaker of Nova Scotia Legislature, on her outstanding achievement and wishes her all the best in the future boxing endeavours. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate. Another tough guy from Cape Breton, but this time it's a girl.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Hammonds Plains, Upper Sackville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Park Cafe, Restaurant and Pantry, Edible Matters, opened their doors this summer at their location on the Hammonds Plains Road. And whereas owner Ian Bunting and the new business has created over 30 jobs in the area, including hiring graduates from the NSCC Culinary School. And whereas head chefs Jamie McCauley and Chris Burton pay close attention to where their ingredients come from, using local, fresh produce and meat, impressing Chronicle Herald's food critic Bill Spur. Therefore, be it resolved that this House welcomes Edible Matters to the Hammonds Plains community and wishes head chefs Jamie McCauley and Chris Burton and owner Ian Bunting and their staff continued success with the cafe, restaurant, and pantry, and creating 30 good jobs in our local area. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on June 11th, Cancer Care Nova Scotia presented its annual Excellence Awards, recognizing the work of cancer healthcare professionals and volunteers. And whereas the Excellence in Patient Care Award for a volunteer was presented to Jim Mulcahy, a two-time cancer survivor and volunteer advocate from Antigonish. And whereas Mr. Mulcahy is a member of local and provincial committees that are working to create programs and policies that have a patient-centric focus, such as the Cancer Care Nova Scotia's Patient Engagement Project and St. Martha's Regional Distress Screening Implementation Team. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House thank Jim Mulcahy for his work on behalf of cancer patients and survivors, congratulate him on receiving the Excellence in Patient Care Award, and wish him all the best. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Aaron Nicholson, Clark's Harbour, was presented with the Nova Scotia Golf Association 2012 Male Player of the Year Award at the Association's annual banquet on October the 27th, 2012. And whereas Aaron Nicholson won the award by topping the leaderboard in points earned during the 2012 season at sanctioned tournaments across the province, including his second Nova Scotia Mid-Amateur Championship title on June the 24th. And whereas Aaron Nicholson, who has also won the NSGA Male Player of the Year Award in 2010, has been an ambassador for the province over the years at numerous golfing events, including the 2012 Canada's Mid-Amateur Championship at the leader of Team Nova Scotia. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly congratulate Aaron Nicholson for being named the 2012 Male Player of the Year by Nova Scotia Golf Association. Mr. Speaker, request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Scotsburn Dairy has been making Baskin-Robbins products for the last several years, and whereas in July of this year, Baskin-Robbins announced that as of October 2012, Scotsburn Dairy would be their exclusive supplier of ice cream for all 113 of their shops across Canada. And whereas this deal will bring more work and will mean more hours, more shifts, and likely more employees at their plant in Truro, therefore it be resolved that all members of this House congratulate Scotsburn Dairy on becoming Baskin-Robbins' exclusive supplier and applaud Baskin-Robbins for seeing the opportunities available in Nova Scotia and choosing to move their business here. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Guysborough, Sheet Harbour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in 2007, hundreds of citizens from Canso and Guysborough County presented a petition urging the Conservative government to meet with them to discuss what they described as their economically depressed region of Nova Scotia and to help them seek ways and means of replacing employment lost by the closing of the only major industry in the area. And whereas this petition, tabled by the NDP member for Pictou East, was ignored by the Conservative government, who refused to support the people of Guysborough County in their time of need. And whereas the NDP government has time and time again proven their commitment to supporting rural communities like Canso and Guysborough County, and made investments in local companies like Authentic Seacoast, which is bringing 35 new jobs to the area and expects to bring even more in the years to come. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House congratulate the NDP government for demonstrating their commitment to growing the rural economy and, unlike previous Conservative governments, recognizing the value of small business in Nova Scotia.
That's all right.
Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? I hear several noes. The motion is tabled. The honourable member for Truro Bible Hill.
Princes of pessimism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Brenda Leenders, a public health nutritionist in Truro, helped organize the 2011 Food Grains Bank's Atlantic Food Justice Camp and participated in the Food Grains Bank Food Study Tour to Haiti, and whereas Brenda Leenders, who is a founding member of the Harvest for Hunger Nova Scotia, has recently been appointed as Provincial Regional Coordinator for the Canadian Food Grains Bank, a partnership of 15 churches and church agencies working together to end global hunger. And whereas in her new volunteer position, Brenda will work to raise awareness about global hunger issues and provide support for fundraising for the Food Grains Bank, therefore be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulates Brenda Leenders on her appointment as the Regional Coordinator for the Canadian Food Grains Bank, and that we thank her for her work in raising awareness and funds for global hunger. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Reverend Johnny Matthew Pitchapilly, pastor of St. Andrew's Parish in Eastern Passage, has published his new book, The Table of the Word, and just released his 5th music album, The Meditation of the Soul. And whereas Father Johnny has an esteemed reputation as a singer-songwriter in his native India, once singing for tens of thousands of fans at a concert there, has released 5 music albums in the last 6 years and has written around 500 songs. And whereas Father Johnny has been the rector at St. Andrew's Parish in Eastern Passage for 2 years, dedicating his days to the members of his parish, and invited the entire community to his book launch and CD release on September 20th at the Eastern Passage Lions Club. Therefore, be it resolved that this Nova Scotia House of Assembly congratulates Father Johnny Matthew Pitchapilly on his recent book launch and CD release, as well as the admirable dedication he has shown to the people of the parish of St. Andrews in Eastern Passage since taking on the position of parish priest. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas small businesses and entrepreneurs define the character of our communities and breathe life into our streetscapes. And whereas Mark and Melanie Bailey of Hell Bay Brewing Company are expanding their operation. And whereas on New Year's Day 2013, Hell Bay Brewing Company will be located on Legion Street in downtown Liverpool, Queens County. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly recognizes and congratulates Mark and Melanie Bailey of Hell Bay Brewing Company for their entrepreneurial spirit and contribution to the business community of Queens County. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Citadel Theatre Society is a not-for-profit society whose mission is to promote arts and culture through the operation of the Spats Community Theatre at Citadel High School, and whereas the Spats Community Theatre is a multifunctional performance space that provides exceptional theatrical experiences to Citadel High students and the Greater Halifax area, while serving as a vital community resource for public lectures and activities. And whereas on November 2nd, 2012, the Citadel Theatre Society hosted Splash at the Spats 2, a benefit performance and fundraiser for the Spats Community Theatre, featuring award-winning comedian Ron James. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly recognizes the Citadel Theatre Society for its work in bringing the Spats Theatre community to fruition as a valuable community resource, particularly in the promotion of arts and culture, and extends congratulations on staging a highly successful fundraiser. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Cecilia McCrae of Big Island, Pictou County, is committed to improving the lives of persons suffering from mental illness at many levels of our society. And whereas Cecilia McCrae is a founding member of the Pictou County Family Support Group, which assists family members, caregivers, and friends of those with mental illness. And whereas in 2009, Cecilia McCrae was elected as the president of the Schizophrenia Society of Nova Scotia and appointed to the Minister's Task Force on Mental Health. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the Nova Scotia House of Assembly thank and congratulate Cecilia McCrae for her passion and dedication in support of thousands of Nova Scotians with mental illness. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Mr. Speaker, I would have liked to be able to ask for an introduction, but I'm afraid I'm dealing with a bashful author, so I will simply read this resolution. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Yuri Vasilyev is a native of Moscow and worked for many years in the diplomatic service, specializing in African affairs, and whereas Yuri Vasilyev has recently published Over the Equator, a partially fictionalized account of the travels and tribulations of Philip Efremov, an 18th century Russian explorer who spent 9 years in freedom and in slavery in different parts of Africa. And whereas Mr. Vasilyev has now retired to live in Nova Scotia, where, as a member of the Corps of Commissioner, he spends long days in the House of Assembly. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House congratulate Mr. Yuri Vasilyev on the publication of Over the Equator, pages from the Journal of Russian trailblazer Philip Efremov, and remember yet again how privileged we are in the Nova Scotia House of Assembly to be joined by so many talented people from across the province and around the world. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Shibukto.
Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Nova Scotia's highly skilled paramedics play an important and vital role in our healthcare system, and whereas for over a decade the province has trusted TriStar Industries to build high-quality ambulances that keep our paramedics on the road and deliver better care sooner for all Nova Scotians, and whereas TriStar Industries will expand its operation in Yarmouth, ensuring over 60 good jobs remain in southwest Nova Scotia and creating at least 16 new positions, which is sure to please the member for Yarmouth. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House, in particular the member for Yarmouth, applaud the NDP government's commitment to creating jobs and growing Nova Scotia's economy. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? I hear several noes. The motion is tabled. The Honourable Member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the St. Margaret's Bay Lions Club has been recognized by Lions International for its continuing efforts to raise funds for seeing eye dogs. Whereas the St. Margaret's Bay Lions has raised more money for this program than any other Lions club in Canada. Whereas at its annual spring road toll, the St. Margaret's Bay Lions raised $6,959, money that will be used to sponsor the club's 13th Seeing Eye Dog. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulates the St. Margaret's Bay Lions on their great work living up to the motto of Lions International of "We Serve" by providing funds for the Seeing Eye Dog program. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Lunenburg West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Miss May Forbes, a resident of Bridgewater, Nova Scotia, and formerly of Seal Harbour, Guysborough, celebrated her 102nd birthday on October 5th, 2012. And whereas Ms. Forbes has volunteered over the years for a number of organizations in the Bridgewater area, including the Dawson Daisy for the last 38 years, and whereas Ms. Forbes has over the course of many years won countless awards for her volunteer work, including Maritimer of the Week, therefore be it resolved that members of this House thank Ms. May Forbes for her many years of volunteer service to the community and congratulate her on the occasion of her 102nd birthday. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice of passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Cumberland North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas LED roadway lighting is a leading designer and manufacturer of LED, light-emitting diode-based streetlights, which reduce energy use and greenhouse gas emissions. And whereas our government has been proud to support LED roadway lighting and to see this company experience significant growth over the last couple of years.
That's it.
And whereas LED, a global leader in innovative technology, has chosen to grow their business in Amherst, Nova Scotia, creating good sustainable jobs in this province.
Good place to do it.
Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly join me in congratulating LED roadway lighting on their successes to date and for the good work this company is doing to create good jobs for Nova Scotian families and grow our economy.
Absolutely.
Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All in favour say aye. Those opposed nay. The motion is carried. I now recognize the Honourable Member for Hammonds Plains, Upper Sackville.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on July 14th, 2012, Anchor Industries Society hosted their 3rd annual fun fair at their location in Lower Sackville to raise awareness and funds towards their Building Futures campaign. And whereas the successful event featured many fun activities, including a bouncy castle, base painting, beanbag toss, and a large dunk tank, in addition to their delicious treats served on site. And whereas Anchor Industries Society works tremendously hard all year round to support community members with intellectual disabilities and special needs through fundraising and their restaurant, The Ladle, their print shop, The Offshoot Shop, and their gift and card business all wrapped up. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly congratulates Anchor Industries Society on their successful 3rd annual fun fair and thanks them for their incredible work they do all year round for persons with intellectual disabilities. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage. Madam Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All in favour say aye. Those opposed nay. The motion is carried. I now recognize the Honourable Member for Kings North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Valley Waste Resource Management provides waste management services to the Annapolis Valley, serving approximately 83,000 residents and 38,000 households and commercial units with the main goals of fiscal responsibility, social acceptance, and environmental soundness. And whereas Valley Waste Resource Management officially opened their new administrative office on October 4th, 2012, which, in addition to being incredibly energy efficient, is designed to demonstrate the possibilities of using reused and recycled materials and features the use of chipped post-consumer tires to make aggregate for the foundation, concrete sidewalks and flooring containing recycled glass, asphalt shingle mix in the paving, cellulose insulation from old newsprint, plastic lumber made from recycled materials, and interior finishes using reclaimed wood. And whereas Valley Waste Resource Management's new building will be one of the first commercial buildings in Canada to be accredited with both Leadership in Energy and Environment and Design, or LEED, and Passive House certification, therefore be it resolved that all members of the House of the Legislature congratulate Valley Waste Resource Management for making its office building a model of what is possible, and for making the Annapolis Valley an acknowledged leader in effective waste management. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Lunenburg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Nova Scotia Music Awards highlights the best that Nova Scotia's music industry has to offer, including artists, performers, media, and industry professionals and venues, while connecting communities with the music that they love. And whereas Lunenburg native Joel Plaskett has been nominated as Songwriter of the Year and Entertainer of the Year, and while Spectacle Lakes resident Jordy Comstock has been nominated as Musician of the Year. And whereas Acadia Broadcasting in Bridgewater has been nominated as Corporate Sponsor of the Year and Radio Program of the Year for that East Coast show, while the show's host, Jonathan Krause, has seen his annual summer event, Riverfest, nominated as Event of the Year. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulates all nominees of the 2012 Nova Scotia Music Awards taking place in Liverpool and recognize the strong South Shore talent being recognized in the province of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the NDP MLA for Kings North chose to make an unprovoked and personal attack against one of the current longest-serving members of this legislature. And whereas the rarely seen or heard from MLA for Kings North, first elected in 2009, can only dream of having the electoral success of the member he personally attacked. And whereas if the NDP MLA for Kings North, NDP caucus staff, or anyone else in the NDP party is truly interested in looking through history for elected members who have faced criminal convictions, they need look no further than within the current and past NDP caucus. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly join me in reminding the MLA for Kings North, NDP caucus staff, and all NDP MLAs of the wise saying, people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones.
That's a good one. The motion is tabled. The time has arrived for oral questions put by members to ministers. The time is now 3:33. We will end at 5:03. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Economic and Rural Development. Mr. Speaker, the government has a habit of over-promising and under-delivering when it comes to job targets, Mr. Speaker. And I sincerely hope we're able to bring 440 Nova Scotians home. Too many of our sons and daughters have fled the province because of the government's economic mismanagement, Mr. Speaker. 4,000 young Nova Scotians have left our province since the NDP have taken office. So my question to the Minister is, why has the government created an economy that is forcing young Nova Scotians out of our province at an accelerated rate?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise my place in response is that what we are doing, and we've declared when we came into government, we were going to do things differently. We were going to create employment and stop the out-migration of Nova Scotians. We've done that. We will continue to do that. 7,600 new jobs since we've been government, as opposed to 20 years of a last place finish.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Speaker, young people are needing help from this government. Even though they've needed it for 3 years, government has sat idly by while they've left our province. Those that remain are struggling to find work, Mr. Speaker. Youth, the face of the unemployment rate in their province is almost at 19%, which is an increase, Mr. Speaker, since the NDP government has taken office in 2009. So my question for the minister, why has this government pursued economic policies that have either forced young Nova Scotians to leave our province or to the unemployment line?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, we are creating high-paying jobs so our young people do not have to go to Alberta.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, they must be creating those jobs elsewhere because young Nova Scotians are leaving, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government likes to hype the government's job announcements. We need to look no further, Mr. Speaker, than the example of DSME Trenton. Remember when the Premier promised 500 jobs, Mr. Speaker, and there are less than 60 people working there today. And Nova Scotians look at this Premier with his job targets with suspicion, Mr. Speaker. He agrees to give $590 million to 6 companies and watch them lay off 1,300 Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker. So my question, Mr. Speaker, my question to the minister. You want me to start over again, Mr. Speaker?
No, that's fine.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, my question for the minister, with so many botched business deals and missed job targets, why should Nova Scotians trust you now?
Honourable the Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think with what this government has done, when I look at Shelburne Shipyard, when I consider the game changers that are on the horizon for the future of Nova Scotia, the Irving Shipbuilding contract, Mr. Speaker, 11,500 jobs, Mr. Speaker, not to mention Muskrat Falls, Mr. Speaker. We've worked towards the future, Mr. Speaker. Now, I can understand, Mr. Speaker, how some past governments didn't understand that philosophy. If we had 20 years, just think what we could have done, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today the Premier announced he's giving $11.4 million in taxpayers' money to Projects Technologies, an engineering firm that set up in Nova Scotia last year. Well, Mr. Speaker, there are many engineering firms already established in Nova Scotia, including 6 that have moved here in recent years, all without financial assistance from the NDP. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Premier is, why Projects and not these other companies? Was it simply because they asked?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're not giving anything to anyone. In fact, Projects is a company, as he pointed out, an engineering company out of Alberta. They will come to Nova Scotia or expand in Nova Scotia to be more appropriate. 440 jobs, the average paycheck around $90,000 per a job. That's going to at the end of the 5 years, those 440 jobs will represent almost $50 million a year into the economy of Nova Scotia. That's 440 families with good jobs, paying money into our economy. And they're new jobs and new work. It's an export business, taking work from other places and doing it here.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier says there are new jobs, and we all wish that that was true. Projects is on a hiring spree right now, Mr. Speaker. 20 people they've hired from Stantec, an existing Nova Scotia engineering firm. Another 8 they've hired from SNC Lavalin, another existing Nova Scotia engineering firm. They've hired engineers from AMEC, Whitman Bend, another existing Nova Scotia engineering firm, all with taxpayer incentives to move jobs from one end of Halifax to the other end of Halifax, Mr. Speaker. That is not job creation. It's simply using taxpayers' money to move existing jobs around. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Economic Development said he doesn't see how government investment in DSTN gives them an advantage over other companies. Obviously it does. We'd hope the Premier would see the difference. Obviously he doesn't either. So my question to the Premier is quite simple. Why is he using taxpayers' money to simply move existing jobs around?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, that couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, this is work that this company has that is done in Alberta for Alberta companies. Now, they can either hire people from Nova Scotia to go to work in Calgary and do the work, or they can hire people in Halifax to do the work. The work for the other company remains with them. They can hire their own employees, and in fact, what this does, Mr. Speaker, is it widens the supply of engineers in the province by keeping new graduates here, by attracting back engineers from other parts of the country into Halifax. It increases the supply for the engineering community, creates 440 well-paying jobs, puts $18 million into the tax pockets of the province to be able to spend on health, education, new roads. Wish it was stuff that the leader of the Conservative Party understood.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I really wish the Premier would understand that paying one company to move a job from one end of the city of Halifax to the other end of the city of Halifax is not actually creating a new job. Common sense tells us that. Our own local engineering firms are telling them that. What the Premier says is true of this one company that he is chosen to sprinkle taxpayers' money on is true of all engineering firms in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, the difference now is those other firms are having their own tax dollars used against them to compete for engineers in Nova Scotia. That's what's wrong with the NDP approach. I really wish that what the Premier was saying about jobs coming from Alberta to here was exclusively true, but it's not. So I will ask the Premier, if that's the case, can he get up in the House right now and assure all of us and all Nova Scotians that no taxpayer money will pay one company to recruit from another?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, all the companies in Nova Scotia in a sector compete on a broad basis. They advertise and people answer those advertisements. So, for example, Mr. Speaker, in the case of projects, more than 700 people from outside of the province of Nova Scotia have already applied for jobs to come back to Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. This particular arrangement also requires the company to hire new grads, to hire engineering graduates from the schools of engineering in the region so that young people can actually stay in the province and get good jobs here. That, Mr. Speaker, is the difference between this government and the ex-government.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Minister of Economic Development said, and I quote, Mr. Speaker, DSTN, as I said, are diversifying. They've been working on a market strategy. They're looking for markets all over the world, end of quote. And he was certainly correct. An internal company communications indicates that DSME is preparing to open an engineering company in Houston, Texas. So my question to the Minister, when did the government become aware that the government business partner, DSME, was creating jobs in Houston, Texas, and not in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know where it's considered as a prerequisite that a parent company of a company that's based here in Nova Scotia has to tell the province of Nova Scotia how they're expanding their business, Mr. Speaker. I don't know why they feel they would have to tell us.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Surprised, Mr. Speaker, at the way these guys have been writing checks that every company wouldn't be telling them, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, DSME is preparing to open an engineering firm in Houston, Texas. In the last year, the number of unemployed in North Shore has increased by more than 17%. And the unemployment rate, Mr. Speaker, is continuing to go up. Mr. Speaker, this government promised 500 jobs, Mr. Speaker, but according to this government's number, only a fraction of those jobs have been created. So my question to the minister, Mr. Speaker, with so many unemployed people in Pictou County, will the minister guarantee that none of the $60 million that he's invested will be spent to create those jobs in Houston, Texas?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the answer to that is an obvious one, simply no.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
Speaker, is the minister not guaranteeing that, Mr. Speaker? We all remember Resolute, Mr. Speaker, the $25 million we handed over to Bowater, which they quickly took to Quebec to invest in Quebec, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, we all remember the $25 million that they gave to Resolute that they took out of the province and invested in Quebec, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there are more unemployed Nova Scotians than in December of 2008 in the middle of the recession, Mr. Speaker. We've lost 3,400 full-time jobs since this government has taken office. This government has watched 6 companies that agreed to give $590 million to lay off more than 1,300 Nova Scotians. Now this government-owned company is getting ready to create jobs in Texas. Who knew jobs here was referring, Mr. Speaker, to Texas, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, my question to the minister, given the announcement that we talked about here today, did the government attempt to convince DSME to create those engineering jobs here instead of Houston, Texas, to fulfill its $60 million obligation it has with the people of Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition certainly, in my opinion, doesn't understand the global economy when it comes to employment and the jobs and the way employers work around the world. You know, Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition his numbers are misleading. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, is that we created, since we took over government, we have created 7,600 jobs in the province of Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on a new question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Minister of Economic Development said, and I quote, "I can speak on behalf of this Premier and this party. We want DSTN to be successful. We want them to create good jobs for the good people of Pictou County. That's why we have recommended to them to diversify, to look at a larger market, Mr. Speaker, and be competitive," end of quote. So my question to the minister, since the government told DSME to diversify, was it the minister or the Premier who told them to enter into markets that put them in direct competition against other Nova Scotia companies?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, DSTN in Pictou, we took a facility that had been lying idle for a long time, a very long time. We took that facility, we turned that facility into a productive site with a partnership with a world famous, a world renowned, a world recognized partner, Mr. Speaker. We've done this with confidence. We still have confidence in DSTN. We know, Mr. Speaker, that if that party over there would get out of the way, we'd see more success in the province of Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Improving the infrastructure of this plant, Mr. Speaker, to create wind turbines that no one's buying, Mr. Speaker. That's a really good investment of taxpayers' money, Mr. Speaker. DSME plans to compete against Nova Scotia businesses, Mr. Speaker, which will require upgrades to the plant and equipment, Mr. Speaker. The company's diversification will also require additional training and specialized certification. The government told DSME to diversify, and DSME listened, Mr. Speaker, but this will cost money. So my question to the minister, does the minister plan to give DSME more money to fund the cost associated with the upgrades that will require for his diversification plan?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this question comes as no surprise to me because it was that leader, that party over there, Mr. Speaker, that spoke against 400 jobs in the South Shore, Mr. Speaker. It was that government, that party over there that spoke out against Irving Shipbuilding, Mr. Speaker. It was that party over there and that speaker that spoke out against Port Hawkesbury, against NewPage, Mr. Speaker. It was that party, that leader over there that spoke out against all those things about job creation in the province of Nova Scotia. And on top of that, Mr. Speaker, about a 30 to a 50% hike in power rates, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
Speaker, was that government and that minister that has increased power by 30%, Mr. Speaker? That's no fiction, that's reality that Nova Scotians are facing every day, Mr. Speaker. It was that minister and that government that promised 400 jobs to the people of the South Shore, Mr. Speaker, when Resolute cast the check and headed off to Quebec, Mr. Speaker. Not a single job, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it was that government, Mr. Speaker, that wrote a check to Scanwood, Mr. Speaker, just before they go bankrupt, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it was that government that wrote $155 million to Stern, Mr. Speaker, at the same time they were sending pink slips out to half the workforce in the Australia area, Mr. Speaker. That's not economic development, Mr. Speaker. That's not an economic development strategy, Mr. Speaker. That's an open door for big business to walk in and pick the pockets of a sorry government, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we now know, Mr. Speaker, we now know that this government encouraged DSME to enter into the oil and gas sector, Mr. Speaker, and shipbuilding business, Mr. Speaker, and they sat idly by while their business partner is creating jobs in Texas. So my question to the minister, as he was telling his business partner to diversify to compete against oil and gas companies in Nova Scotia, should there be any other sector in this province that should be concerned about your government's diversification plan?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'll tell you the facts. It was this government that invested in Stream in Glace Bay, Mr. Speaker. It was this government that invested in Shelburne, Mr. Speaker, so that they could have a viable shipyard today, Mr. Speaker. Excuse me. It was this government that invested in Eden Valley and Berwick, Mr. Speaker. It was this government that makes investments that will produce good jobs for good Nova Scotians in the province of Nova Scotia. And it's this government that will take care of the future, Mr. Government, unlike previous governments in this province.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Mr. Speaker, for the Premier, Mr. Speaker, 7,400 Nova Scotians have lost their full-time jobs since October of 2009. In every age category, full-time jobs are now disappearing in our province. In fact, we hear weekly of more layoffs, whether it's Minas Basin Pulp and Power or Bowater, and the list goes on and on. All the while, Mr. Speaker, the Premier and his government have given out $500 million to specific companies. So my question to the Premier, in light of this evidence, will he abandon his expensive corporate welfare spending spree and get on with the job of actually making our economy better?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I really hope that the leader of the Conservative Party doesn't think that anybody is taking him seriously, because the reality is that every jurisdiction in North America, in fact, almost every jurisdiction in the world, has a business retention and attraction mechanism of some kind, whether it is something like a rebate program, which of course relies on the actual creation of jobs and the actual expenditure of the payroll money in order to recover anything. It's essentially companies being paid with their own money. Now, Mr. Speaker, what the leader of the Conservative Party, and for that matter, the leader of the Liberal Party, never says, for example, with respect to Irving, which was in the area of $300 million, is that that is a commercial loan. a commercial loan to Irving at a commercial rate, Mr. Speaker, repayable to the province of Nova Scotia. Let me finish. Repayable to the province of Nova Scotia at a commercial rate, with the proviso that if they create the jobs that are expected and pay to the province some $2.4 billion in tax revenue, they can earn the forgiveness of it. Mr. Speaker, even for the inexperienced leader of the opposition, surely he would see, as the leader of the Conservative Party would see, the good sense of that kind of an arrangement.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure all members in the House appreciated the Premier's description of the rest of the world. But here is what is unique about Nova Scotia. We have the highest taxes in the whole country under his government. We have skyrocketing power rates in this province under his government. We have a string of deficits and new debt on the backs of all Nova Scotians under his government. That is what is unique about Nova Scotia that gets in the way of building a modern, dynamic and growing economy. Mr. Speaker, Michelin, for example, is one of our largest employers. 3,500 jobs in rural Nova Scotia, good, high-paying jobs. It's now been 125 days. It's now been 125 days, Mr. Speaker, since they canceled their expansion plans, leaving the people of the Annapolis Valley waiting and waiting for those good jobs. So my question to the Premier, why are the residents of the Annapolis Valley still waiting for those good jobs?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the reason why Michelin has been successful and has been here in Nova Scotia is because, among other things, including capital grants, they took advantage of payroll rebates. That's what brought them to Nova Scotia. That is what has kept them here, and that is part of the business plan that they continue to pursue. Now, Mr. Speaker, on power rates, we have increases in power rates because the power generating stations in this province are based on coal, fossil fuels, based on decisions made by the previous government. The deficits that we have, as shown by the audit that was done and by the economic panel, is a result of the decisions on spending made by the former government. Yes, Mr. Speaker, their complaint is that we haven't cleaned up their mess fast enough.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his final supplementary.
Oh, Mr. Speaker, apparently, according to the Premier, Michelin had nothing to do with their own success, which I'm sure will be news to the workers and the people of Michelin, which is a worldwide success story. Investing in plants all over the world, except for the ones here during his term as Premier. And the question is why? Mr. Speaker, when Michelin does so well everywhere else, Nova Scotians, particularly those in the Annapolis Valley, are still waiting 125 days to find out why those jobs aren't coming here. Mr. Speaker, in fact, if the Premier wants to look around him, 688,000 full-time jobs have been added everywhere in Canada except Nova Scotia under his term in office, where we're down 7,400 full-time jobs. So, Mr. Speaker, here is a suggestion, a cost-free way to make Nova Scotia attractive again for Michelin, for all kinds of other companies. Will the Premier reconsider his first contract law now and send a signal, a cost-free signal, that this can be a good place to create jobs again?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the simple reality of the situation is, Statistics Canada, even the most recent Statistics Canada show that there are 7,600 more jobs in Nova Scotia than there were when we came to power. From the peak of the recession to the peak employment pre-recession till now, we have more jobs in Nova Scotia, despite the fact that our economy, just like economies around the world, have been battered by some of the strongest economic recessionary pressures in the history of modern society, Mr. Speaker. We have managed through those. We have grown the economy. We've won the largest industrial contract in the history of the province. We're building our way into energy self-sufficiency, and we're bringing 440 new engineering jobs to the province, just announced today.
The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During an October 18, 2011 meeting of the Economic Development Committee, it was decided that a tour of the DSME facility would be arranged. This was enthusiastically agreed to by the government members who had the utmost confidence in DSTN investment at that time. We have yet to have the tour and repeatedly are told it's not possible due to scheduling conflicts. However, on December 16, 2011, DSME announced 40 layoffs. So my question to the Minister of Economic Development: did the Minister know about the pending committee tour, and did he express concern to the Chair regarding a visit to a facility destined for layoffs and diversification?
Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I've toured DSTN prior to DSTN and certainly after, and it was just such a nice positive result to see the before and after, Mr. Speaker. I would never, nor have I ever, interfered with anything that with respect to a planned tour of any facility in the province of Nova Scotia.
The honourable member for Glace Bay on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, on December 18, 2011, there were 40 layoffs announced at DSME Trenton. On May 25, 2012, another 26 people laid off. We have seen media reports saying 70 people are employed at the plant. In August, the minister said approximately 66 people were now employed. Just last week, he said there were less than 60 at DSME Trenton. This minister said he gets daily briefings from the company, and given his government's commitment to create 500 jobs, I would hope he routinely asked about the current levels of employment. So my question to the minister, based on his DSME briefing today, will the minister tell us how many people are working at the site today and when the plant is expected to hit a workforce of 500 people?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as we all know, DSTN is an active plant. They're looking at more global markets. They're expanding their market strategy. They're reaching out to other markets.